So today is our second Sunday in a series of 6 on the book of Daniel. So I'm excited to bring this message series to you. It's been a lot of fun studying it so far, and I know it's only going to be more fun as I get deeper into it. This is my slide that you will see every Sunday. My example of No Compromise. That is actually from the album No Compromise by Keith Green. And today I want to get eventually to the guy standing up in the crowd. But I'm not going to go there straight away. Because the book of Daniel, I believe, or I sense that it is probably the most powerful book in the Old Testament to point us to Jesus Christ. At least that's my interaction with the book. And as I study other parts of the Bible in more depth, maybe I'll change my mind on that. But for now, that's my anchor book in the Old Testament for Jesus. And I think because of that, there's a lot of attacks. Sorry, I'm being attacked right now. I'm going to move this back a bit. There are a lot of attacks against the book of Daniel. And I know some people come to church and they go, well, I believe, and that's enough for me. I don't need any evidence to believe. I just accept it because I know Jesus and I trust him. Therefore, the Bible is all true. But other people look at it and they go, but when people come to me and they say, the book of Daniel, that was written hundreds of years after the events are supposed to have taken place. And it's not real. Daniel was never a real person, and it's all made up, and it's just a story we can learn something from. That really shakes some people's faith. And I think every now and then, as we're going through these things in the Bible, where we get something that has been under attack in the world, and with skeptics, it's good to just step back and make sure we've laid a firm foundation. And so I want to just go on to the kings. This is one of the first things that gets attacked in the book of Daniel. And I have this lovely slide of history. Everybody likes history, right? Remember kings and dates? This is always good. I'm just going to leave that one up there while I'm talking through this next section so you can continually reference until you've memorized for the test when these kings were around, right? And I go way farther than I need to go. I'm actually going to only look at the first 2, but I wanted the other ones up there because their names cause confusion, or at least the 4th and 5th. The third guy nobody cares about. You can ignore him altogether, but he was in there. The thing that happens with the skeptics is they look at the book of Daniel and they don't want to believe the things that are in it. So they say, oh, this was a politically motivated book written 400 years after the events, and they made it all up. And you can tell this because they get the names of the kings all wrong. And they'll start with this first guy, Nabonidus. Now, has anybody seen the verse in Daniel that talks about Nabonidus? No, because he's not there. Trick question. So if we go to Daniel 5, verse 29, it says, this is the end of the passage with the handwriting on the wall. It's one of my favorite stories because God comes to this king, Belshazzar, and he writes on the wall and says, you are finished. Mene, tekel upharsin. You've weighed in the balance, found wanting, and your kingdom is ending, and it's going to be given to the Medes and the Persians. And then it says in verse 29, then at Belshazzar's command, because Daniel had been able to interpret it, Daniel was clothed with purple, a gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom, because that's what he promised him. Whoever can interpret this writing on the wall, I will make the third highest. Now, here's where the critics will come in and they will say, well, they used to say, and some of them still do because they don't keep up with the latest archaeology, there was no such person as Belshazzar. And the king, we know, was Nabonidus. So this is the king who was ruling at the time that this story was supposed to have taken place. Therefore, it shows you that it was written after the fact by somebody who didn't know their history. They messed up the king's name, they made one up, and they stuck Belshazzar in there. And this, for a lot of years, really gave people in the church a hard time to respond to that because we know that Nabonidus was the king at the time. Until 1884, which is a long time ago, and yet this argument still comes up, and we have known the truth since 1884, or the details, right? In 1884, you know how you have a signet ring, or people used to have signet rings, so I hear, I'm not that old. And you would press into your seal into the wax, and everybody knew it was you. Well, they also made things that were cylinders. And the cylinder, they could carve into it, and then you could roll that in soft clay and get more of a square of text out of it. And so they found this, what they call the Nabonidus cylinder. And it was something that this king had written, and in it they found a reference to Belshazzar. And it turns out that Belshazzar was Nabonidus' son, who he had made co-regent. So he was ruling under his father, and he was in Babylon. And what we see with that is, normally when kings were going over the top gracious, they would say things like, I'm going to make you second highest in the kingdom. This is what Pharaoh told Joseph. You're second only to me. This is when kings would say, I'm going to give you up to half of my kingdom. Anything you want, up to half of my kingdom. You always make the guy second in command, and you keep the first place for yourself. But it's weird that Belshazzar said, no, I will make you third. Why third? And now all of a sudden it makes sense, because Belshazzar was second, and he couldn't give away second place, so he gave away third. And so when we come to the text of Daniel, and it says, then at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed with purple, and he was appointed to be the third highest ruler in the kingdom, it actually shows that the author knew more about history than the people who criticized him. Because the author knew that Belshazzar was there as second in command, and that this makes it all take place the way it says. And it makes more sense, right? But when we didn't know, we hadn't found any collaborating evidence about Belshazzar, then people say, well, there's no historical evidence for him. It's odd, because I think the Bible is historical evidence. It's a historical document, right? But that one never gets counted. And so it's no other evidence. So this is the one thing, and I just wanted to make sure, if you've heard these kind of arguments, that there is an answer to them. The second one is a little more complicated, and that's Cyrus. And so we see what happens is Nabonidus and Belshazzar were the end of the line from Nebuchadnezzar. And God had said that he was going to judge the Babylonians. And so Cyrus the Great comes in 539 BC. All those numbers are BC dates, of course. That's why they go backward. He comes in and he takes over the kingdom. So this is what it says if we keep going on in that same passage in Daniel 5, verse 30. That very night Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. So again, this is where the skeptics will come in, and they'll say, you see, they wrote it hundreds of years after the fact. They were making it up, and they didn't remember their history. And they put Darius, number 4 guy there. I guess you got to look this way. I'm looking at the back monitor. They put him in, and they just mixed it all up. And it's okay, because they were making it up anyway, so don't worry about it. And this is a problem that comes up then throughout the rest of Daniel. There's these references between Cyrus and Darius that seem to be confused. In chapter 6, verse 28, which is the end of the lion's den chapter, says, so Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Weird. How do you fit that together? And it had to have happened when? It's sort of odd, right? And why you would mix those two kings if they were so many years apart. We can see there's 8 years between the end of Cyrus's reign and the beginning of Darius's reign. In chapter 9, verse 1, it says, in the first year of Darius, the son of Xerxes, a Mede by descent, who was made the ruler over the Babylonian kingdom. And it's just setting the time frame for something. And then this other one that's the most confusing is in chapter 10 and 11. It's one event. It starts in chapter 10, it finishes in chapter 11. The beginning of chapter 10 sets the time when this happened. It says, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia. So we know if Cyrus came in 539, then we're in 536. It says a revelation was given to Daniel. But then as it goes through the revelation, and an angel is speaking with Daniel, in chapter 11, verse 1, it says, in the 1st year of Darius the Mede, I took my stand to support and protect him being another angelic entity from the end of chapter 10. And so the skeptics look at this and they say, see, they get it all confused. It doesn't even make sense. So here's my answer to this. And this is, again, something that is known. If we have, in the Bible, often we get people named with extra bits to their name. So you say Simon Peter and Simon the Zealot. And the reason you do that is because there's too many Simons. We have this problem at my office. We have too many Daves. And so there's Big Dave and there's Dave Lowe, or we call a Dave G or something, because otherwise you don't know which Dave you're talking about. And so we get this in common names where we have to make a distinction. Judas, not Iscariot. Like if I was Judas in the early church, I would want the not Iscariot after my name, right? I'm not that guy. Mary Magdalene versus Mary, the mother of Jesus. Well, what we see throughout Daniel is Darius the Mede, Cyrus the Persian, and it's trying to make this distinction, right? And if we suppose for a minute, come with me here and I'll give my evidence later. Suppose for a minute that there was another Darius, not Darius the First, Darius the Great, who came in later, but somebody who was there at the same time as Cyrus. And so we have Cyrus and Darius with either a governor or a co-regent. Then we look at these verses, they suddenly make perfect sense. Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus, the Persian. Okay, that makes sense, because if Darius is a co-regent or a governor under Cyrus, then he was both at the same time. We have the 1st year of Darius being the same time as the 1st year of Cyrus. So chapter 9, verse 1 makes sense. And finally, in the chapter 10, 11, we're in the 3rd year of Cyrus, and the angel talks about the 1st year of Darius, so it's something that happened 2 years before. That makes sense, but rather than something that couldn't have happened until 14 years later. So if we had another person whose name was Darius, everything fits, and there's no problem. So is there any reason why we should believe that we have another Darius? Well, there is, actually. Darius was a name, but it's also a title. It means royal one. And a lot of kings would take on throne names, they called them. And we did this right up until fairly modern times. Kings or queens come to the throne, and they become King George V. And maybe his name was something, I don't know what King George, I have no idea what his name was beforehand. But they'll take other names, right? And that becomes a throne name. And we have two people who are very good possibilities for someone who would be a Darius at the time of Cyrus. One is a guy whose name is very unfortunate, and if I was him, I would have taken a different name for a throne name. Gubaru. Gubaru came in, you know, when Cyrus took over, when he killed Belshazzar and took over Babylon, he did not stay there. He went off and he assigned a governor, and that was Gubaru. And Gubru was there for the next number of years and was ruling that area under Cyrus. And he could well have taken that royal one throne name, Darius. But the other guy, and the more I've studied this, because I've been trying to dig into what do we know historically about these different people. The kingdom was the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians, right? It was kind of a merged kingdom, and they had Median kings and Persian kings, and they worked together in that united kingdom, and slowly the Persians took over. They became the more powerful, and the Medes kind of dropped out of the whole equation. So there was a king whose name was really hard to pronounce, Cyaxares, who was the last Median king. His father's name was Astyages, another hard one. But there is evidence that his father, if we went back to chapter 9, verse 1, it says, in the first year of Darius, the son of Xerxes. His father did take Xerxes as a name. And we see Xerxes way down here. And we say, okay, if Darius's son was Xerxes, Darius the Great or Darius the First, his son was Xerxes. It was weird that we have Darius with a father whose name was Xerxes. But actually, this guy's father did take the name Xerxes. And they reused names a lot back then, just like monarchs have done ever since. And so this Cyaxares actually did reign as a co-regent for 2 years with Cyrus. Cyrus brought him back in and said, we're merging the kingdom here. I'm taking over, but, if you can help out, we'll keep everything together. And so you have him in this role, and he could easily have used that name Darius. And so I wanted to just bounce off of this. I know for some people it's like history, whatever, dates and kings and all the rest. But for other people, you're looking at this and you say, I want to know that this is true. I want to know that Daniel was a real person, that these events really happened. And so looking at the history, actually, the more we find out, the more we find that it is not only plausible, but it's reasonable. And actually, if you were just writing the book of Daniel, and after the fact, and you would simplify it and not have things that made no sense, right? You'd get rid of everybody but Cyrus. Just talk about Cyrus. Or you'd say, and the king. Generalize. It's really safe. You're pretty sure there was a king, so just don't mention his name. So when you see things that look obviously odd, that's actually better proof that it's true, because they wouldn't have written it that way if they were after the fact trying to make things up. They would simplify it and keep it more easily readable, let's say that. So I have more stuff if anybody wants to know more. Probably you all think it's more than enough already. But I just want to encourage us that God's word is true, and he has left us things that he allows us to find, like the Nabonidus cylinder, that confirm the word so that we can stand firm on it and know that this is the truth. So that kind of takes me through my little sidelight into some foundation stuff. And I'm going to hit a few other things in other weeks where skeptics have said yes, but, and I'll sort of go into why I stand firm on this, that this was written at the time it says it was. Daniel was taken into captivity when Nebuchadnezzar first came to the throne. He was in Babylon for 70-ish years. And that's another one of the problems here. I mentioned this last week, that some people want Daniel to be 8 years old when he went into captivity. It's because they've looked at Darius and they've assumed it was Darius the First. And then all of a sudden, Daniel's got to be in captivity for 86 years and before the lion's den. And so if he's not like 8 years old, he's way too old. But when you put it back and say, no, actually, the whole lion's den thing with Darius happened under the reign of Cyrus, all of a sudden, he's only in captivity for 66 years. So he's not so old. He was still an old man. When he went in the lion's den, he was in his early 80s. He must have been thinking, maybe this is it. I'm going home. And God said, no, not yet. Not yet. But yeah, so that also gets you into problems if you don't see how it fits together correctly. So now on to the main part of my sermon. The guy standing up in the crowd. When do we do that? When do we say, no, I'm going to make my stand here? Well, I want to start with the first chapter of Daniel. We looked at the captivity and all of the training of the captives last week. But in verse 8 it says, "But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine." Now, as we looked at it last week, when they were taken in and they were being trained, they were put into the University of Babylon. They were given food from the king's table. Now, this was a problem for Daniel and for Ananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, because they looked at that and they said, we're Jewish, and we are God's chosen people, and as such, He's given us some rules as to what we can eat. Like, we can't have pork, and we have to have the blood drained out of the animals, and we don't want the meat to have been offered to another god or something. And so, as who we are, they were trained in this. We can't eat this stuff. And even if I could, I don't know what I can eat and what I can't. And I can't be asking the guy, well, what did they do with this piece of meat? And how was that one prepared, right? So they decide to just go strict vegan. And I'm going, wow, that's dedication. It wasn't that they weren't allowed to have any meat, but they just said, no, if we stick with only vegetables, then we're safe. And they said, so they went and said, can we have just vegetables? This is an interesting passage because they did make a stand on this. It was who they were. It was their identity in God as His chosen people. They may not have understood that part of that was a symbol of what Christ would do. They understood that the meat was supposed to have the blood drained out because the life of the animal was in the blood, and that was part of sacrifice. Did they understand that the Messiah was going to come and His blood would be what saves us? Probably not at that time. But they knew that this was what they were told, and they just wanted to obey. With that, they didn't make a demand. They actually said, hey, we'd like to just eat vegetables. And the guy who is watching over them, and just have it here, they asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself in this way. Now, God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel, but the official told Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than the other men your age? That's a good thing, right? Vegans probably aren't healthy. That's what that says to me. I don't know. If you're a vegan, I'm sorry. I take it back. It's all good. Whatever you do, as long as you bless God for the food, it's all good. The king would then have my head because of you. So this was a matter of life and death. If they don't look healthy, and the guy's afraid they won't. So Daniel said to the guard, too bad, I'm only going to eat the vegetables. No, he didn't actually. He said to the guard whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink, and then compare our appearance to that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So they just came in this very gently, even though they were completely convicted that they needed to follow God in this. They also left it in God's hands. And they said, give us 10 days. The guy agrees to the test. Of course, they look fine. God keeps them, and they don't have to eat the other stuff while they're in the training. So this is a place, I think, where we have to stand. This is a matter of our identity. And as Christians, we cannot participate in things that go against our identity in Christ. It says in Corinthians, I should write the whole thing in my notes. 1 Corinthians 6, verse 19 and 20, it says, "You are not your own. You were bought with a price. Therefore glorify or honor God with your bodies." We do not belong to ourselves. We saw this this morning when Dirk was here with the kids, and he was saying, I place my life in your hands, my life is in your hands. And there's a real promise in this, knowing that we are not our own, we're bought with a price. We are safe in Christ, and Satan can't come at us. But, you know, the verse is talking about sexual immorality and saying, honor God with your bodies, because you do not have the right to use your body just to satisfy your own desires. You are Christ. He bought us. We're no longer our own. As Christians, we belong to God, and we serve God. And this Daniel knew. Daniel and his friends knew this. They served God, and they could not participate in things that were outside what God had for them. So we can't either. That's the place where we have to stand up. And we say, you know, I don't have to stop others. Daniel wasn't trying to get everybody else to go all vegetables only, right? I don't have to tell other people, you can't participate in anything that I think is sinful. It's what God has said in His Word to us. And there's some things that are very straightforward. They are absolutely crystal clear. Like in the verse in Corinthians 6, it's saying, abstain from sexual sin because you are not your own. You are bought with a price. So honor God. That's very clear. I can't participate. I can't cheer people on for things that are against God. Other things are hard. They go into a gray area. So my company, I work for Canfor. Maybe I shouldn't say that. This is being taped. But we are a company that cares about the community. And we try to give back to the communities we're in. And I think that the company honestly does. They really do care. But they're also for-profit company. They want to make sure that the communities we're in like us so that we can work smoothly in them, right? So every year we have a fundraising event, and we make it a big contest between the different departments. You know, who can raise the most, and the company will put in as much as whatever the employees raise. And the company encourages us to be generous. This is a good thing, right? We should be generous. And to give back to the community, and we should give back to the community. And so what they do, however, because as a big company, they don't want to pick and choose different charities. You go to an umbrella organization and you give all your money to them. And because we are for profit, we want to have a big check that we can hand out to the umbrella organization and get in the paper and make sure everybody sees it, right? You know, Jesus said, if you give your money to be seen of men, you have your reward already. And we would say, good. That's what we want, our reward already. That the whole community will think will understand that we are corporate citizens and we're trying to be good. So I have a problem every year with this. And I look at it and I say, that umbrella organization supports dozens of charities, and most of which I either think are great, and I would give money to them if they came to my door, or I think they're who cares? I'd give money to them, whatever. It's no big deal one way or the other. And a few of them, I don't agree with what they're doing. And I go, I can't be a part of that. And if I give to the umbrella organization, it goes to everybody. So then, you know, I could designate. I could say, here's my money. Please only give it to the community food bank. But the umbrella organization still takes their 10% or whatever for administration. I don't know how much it is. And they use that for everything. And I go, every year I struggle and I say, God, let me give to this. And God has never allowed me to give to it. because I just say there's some things that they're supporting that I don't want a penny of my money going to. I don't want to support counseling for unwed mothers to have abortions. I can't give to that. And so I have to stand up because they come and they say, well, have you filled out your form yet? You know, and I go, well, I'm not going to give to this. That's hard. Now, I'm not saying that that's right for everybody. You know, Jesus, when he was asked about the taxes, and he said, took the coin and he said, whose image is this? Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's. I support a lot of things I don't agree with. I pay my taxes every year, and my government does whatever they're going to do with it. But that one, I look at it and I say, well, Jesus sort of said, pay your taxes. It's not your problem what the government does with it. Well, some Christians, I'm sure, could look at that and say, well, give to Canfor what is Canfor's. What they do with it, don't worry about it. And if God gives you that freedom, then that's fine. That's not an issue of right or wrong. It's one of those gray areas. And so in the gray areas, we have to say, God, am I to stand up here or not? And I can come to one conclusion, and you might come to the opposite conclusion, and both of us are right. If we've prayed it through before God, we have to do what our conscience says. And that's what Romans 14 is about, right? I think it's 14, 12, 14, somewhere in there. That we can come to different conclusions on some of the specifics in life before God. There are some things that are very clear. And when he says stand, we stand. And there are some things that are going to be my own conviction. And then I have to say, okay, God, how do I work this out in my life in integrity before you? And God's going to take us through different paths. And they may change over time. There may come a day where God says, go ahead, give to that thing, and it's okay. It hasn't happened yet. Every year I try, and God never lets me. But you know, that's just the way it goes. Some things are just between us and our conscience before God. So this is the first place where I think we have to be ready to stand for God, is that we cannot participate in things that go against who we are as Christians. And so we say, God, I will give myself to you and you only. And anything that's outside of that, I can't be part of it. And I will stand up and be counted. But at the same time, I see a gentleness here that Daniel was not trying to be out there with, you know, down with the king's food, placards and stuff. He was just saying, look, for me, I can't do this. I expect that people who are outside of the faith of Christ are going to live as though they are outside of the faith of Christ. And if I could change everybody in the world so that nobody would sin, but they didn't find Jesus and they died and went to a Christless eternity anyway, what would the point be of that? We need to just be talking with people about Christ, and then we'll bring them to the place where they'll see, oh yeah, I need help from my sin. But it's not about changing the world around me. And that's something I think I see in Daniel, that he wasn't trying to necessarily change the world around him. Now, I have two more places we're going to go. Of course, we're going to talk about the fiery furnace, and we're going to talk about the lion's den. But I knew I felt I had to put some apologetics down as a foundation. So I've run out of time, and I knew I would, and I'm going to save those for next week. And we'll dig into those two passages next week, and maybe a little bit further into Daniel. So I just pray that God would give us the strength to stand when it is time to stand, and that he would help us to be an example so that when we stand, people say, yeah, I can see his life is dedicated to being a Christian, so it makes sense that he refuses to take part in these different things. Pray that God would be with you today, that he would bless you and keep you, and that we would just dig in deeper to His Word. Amen. Thank you all for putting up with me. No, it's great. I'm looking forward to the rest of the series as we go into it. I hope you're enjoying it. If you do want to catch up on last Sundays, if you missed it, it is on our website. I think it's up now. So anyway, God bless. Have a great day.